I grew up in the projects. It was hard. We were poor. After graduating high school, there wasn't too many options for me. So I joined the military. I joined the military because it presented me with an opportunity to better myself. I worked hard at it. It wasn't easy, but if I had to do it all over again, I would have, because I wanted you and your brothers to have a better opportunity in education that I ever had.
When my dad was 17, he joined the military. But before the Marine Corps shipped him off to the Vietnam War, my dad realized he had a problem. He said, when I would have conversations with people, I knew that they were speaking English, but I couldn't understand them. To remedy this problem, my dad went to the educational department on the military base. There, they told him he would have to take a placement exam, and then he would be able to take further basic level English classes that would improve his reading, writing, and speaking skills. After he took this placement exam, they told him that at the age of 17, and as a high school graduate, he was only reading at a 7th grade level. But why was this the case? This didn't make sense. I mean, my dad went to school, he worked hard, he successfully graduated, so why was he so far behind? Furthermore, why was this the case for so many young black men and women at the time? Well, for you to understand this, I have to provide you with some history. My dad was born in 1955 in the 7th Ward of New Orleans, and he grew up in the St. Bernard projects. His family was poor, so his mom, my grandmother, didn't have the means to send him and his siblings to anywhere but their neighborhood schools, which provided them with enough education to simply get by. However, my dad and his siblings weren't lucky enough to only stress about homework and tests like you and I. They were also plagued with worrying about what came with being black and growing up in the 1950s and 60s. But these factors didn't stop them. They worked hard, and they all graduated. But they didn't want their education to stop there, so they all joined the military. Without the money or the proper education, they realized that college wasn't an obtainable goal. But this case wasn't unique to my dad and his siblings. Many young black men and women at the time joined the military because the benefits and the education that they offered was the next best thing, and kind of the only next thing. However, the timeline of the lack of adequate education in the black community did not begin with my dad and his siblings, nor did it start in the 1950s and 60s in general. This trend can date back to slavery in America. When slaves were brought to America, they suffered a stripping of their culture, many horrendous physical and mental acts against them, and there was also a halt to their education. Slaves were not allowed to learn to read or write and would be reprimanded if they did so. White slave owners believed that literacy would allow slaves the power to question their oppression and seek freedom. Now, in 1865, slavery was abolished, and slaves were suddenly free. But this freedom was severely limited. While yes, slaves were legally allowed to work for wages and pursue an education, but the deep scars left by centuries of oppression created a massive educational gap and societal gap, one that was hard to close. I like to use the analogy of a race. Black Americans were starting from behind, while white Americans had full opportunity to take advantage of everything they had at their fingertips for years with little to no setbacks. Black Americans were left to catch up. This mistreatment would continue for decades through policies like segregation, disenfranchisement, and inequality in education. It wasn't just that schools for black children were underfunded or overcrowded. Oftentimes they were outright inferior, intentionally designed to keep black Americans at a disadvantage. In the 1890s, the separate but equal doctrine established by Plessy v. Ferguson cemented racial segregation in public institutions, including schools. The idea was that schools could be separated on the basis of race as long as they were supposedly equal. But the equality and the quality of education was not honored. It wouldn't be until the mid-20th century where we see a massive shift. A shift sparked by the struggles of black families and the voices of black activists who refused to accept this mistreatment. This monumental moment was known as Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. In 1954, the Supreme Court decided that separating children on the basis of race was unconstitutional, therefore overturning Plessy v. Ferguson. Among the first to integrate a white school were the Little Rock Nine: Minna Jean Brown, Elizabeth Eckford, Carlotta Walls, Mel Patillo, Thelma Mothershed, Ernest Green, Terrence Roberts, and Jefferson Thomas were the first to integrate an all-white school in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957. However, this transition was not safe, smooth, or easy for these 9 African-American students. When they were set to integrate, they were blocked by the white community members, along with the governor at the time, Orville Faubus, who even went as far as sending out the National Guard to block them from attending. It wouldn't be until President Eisenhower intervened and sent out 1,000 troops to ensure the students' safety and attendance. Similarly, in 1960, Ruby Bridges was the first black kindergartner to integrate an all-white elementary school in New Orleans, Louisiana. Ruby Bridges began her journey to school, but it was different than most kids her age. She was accompanied by 3 U.S. Marshals who protected her from the threats of the white mobs that surrounded her. As you can see, white people became very angry with the idea of desegregation. It wasn't just that black people were integrating their schools, they were also going to the same movies, restaurants, and inhabiting the same neighborhoods, for example. In response, white flight emerged. White flight is a term used to describe the exodus of white families from urban areas, particularly those that were becoming more racially integrated, to suburban areas, or ones that were more racially homogeneous. White flight reversed all of the progress that black Americans had made, and it had many negative effects on society. White families left poor black families in urban areas, and they even created their own private schools that only other white families could afford. Black students were back to square one, attending underfunded, overcrowded, and neglected schools. Louisiana was no exception to the white flight trend. Many of the schools in our area had founders that proudly proclaimed their intention to maintain segregation and exclude black students. Episcopal was created during this time, in 1965, and it was a predominantly white institution. However, through my research, I can't say that it was a white flight school because the founders never explicitly said that white flight was a guiding factor when opening Episcopal. Rather, it was meant to be a next step for their children and grandchildren to continue their education in a school that would be rooted in Episcopal values. Before Episcopal, the previous predominantly white institution I attended left me with a lot of trauma, mental and physical. I straightened my hair until it was damaged and dead because curly hair didn't allow me to fit in. And I even thought about how when I got older, I would bleach my skin so I could look like the other pretty white girls in my class. While since then I don't feel that way anymore, I wear my hair straight or curly as I please, and I love my brown skin, that experience made me adamant about not wanting to attend another predominantly white institution. So when sophomore year rolled around and my mom suggested that I attend Episcopal, I chuckled and shut that idea down immediately. We argued and argued about where I would go, but I'm standing here today, so I guess you can say she won, but I'm happy she did. There's no doubt that as a predominantly white institution, Episcopal has a past to address. I mean, this is a photo from Episcopal's 1990 yearbook. There's a slave day auction community service opportunity offered to EHS club members. Now, we don't really know what this community service opportunity entailed. That's not really the point. The point is the language. We would never use this language today because we know it's harmful. In addition to this, the Underground Railroad activity that happened in lower school ended just over a decade ago. But acknowledging this past does not undermine the many things Episcopal has done and implemented here to create a safe and inclusive space for all, despite race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, or background. I am the proud president of the Black American Heritage Club, and I look into the crowd. I see members of No Place for Hate, officers for Asian Heritage Club, Spectrum Club members, and a diverse student body that makes the Episcopal community what it is today. In his letter from a Birmingham jail, Dr. King said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Education is the key to breaking these cycles of injustices and ensuring that every child, every person, regardless of race, has an equal opportunity to pursue an education and be put in a position to succeed. Now, there's no doubt that mistakes have been made, deep and painful mistakes, but we do not move forward by ignoring them. We push forward by learning from them, by acknowledging the past while actively working to shape a better future. It is up to us, as students, educators, and members of this community, to make sure that schools are spaces of respect, equity, and opportunity for all. Change begins with awareness, but it continues with action. So I challenge all of you to use your voice, your privilege, and your education so that justice in the education system is not something that we fall short of. It's not just an ideal, but a reality. Thank you.